I'm Shanetta McDonald, and I am the only Black woman in the room with an eating disorder.
So we are here today in person with Shanetta McDonald. And before we start the interview, I just wanted to ask you, because Scott and I have been watching that series Alone. I don't know if you've seen it.
I have not.
So you get sent into this really hostile environment
The
all
Arctic.
by yourself. Right. Or they have other, like some are on islands. And so my question to you, because we're fascinated with the idea of just, I could never survive. Every time they do something, I'm like, what would I do there? He's like, honey, you would never be there.
You would never even allow yourself to be there.
Don't
But
worry.
really, honey, what would I do?
What would I do?
You would not be there.
Would I eat the mouse?
And they wouldn't have accepted you.
If you had to spend 5 months alone in the wild, no contact with any human, and you could only bring 5 items, what would they be?
Now, is this assuming that alone in the wilderness there would be food, or there will be no food? Okay, got it. I'd bring food.
You bring
Right.
food,
I'd bring food.
but like what?
You know what? I guess, gosh, there's so many things to consider. Refrigeration.
Yeah, 5 months.
5 months. Probably just a bunch of snacks, honestly.
But you only bring 5 things.
But so one, gosh,
You have to survive out there.
hot Cheetos.
Cheetos.
Don't
Hot
judge
Cheetos?
me.
You've got to see the show.
Don't judge me. Hot Cheetos.
They dream about hot Cheetos during the
they?
show. Oh
They
my
do.
God. They're
They
like,
do. Yes. So you bring hot Cheetos. What
Hot
else?
Cheetos, music.
Music.
Yeah,
Mhm.
obviously something portable with batteries. My journal.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a writer, so I'd bring my journal. A thought came to mind of bringing my dog, but that probably wouldn't work well in the
You're
woods.
going to have to eat your dog.
I would probably eat my
after
dog.
The Cheetos are gone.
You have to pick between the pit and the golden doodle.
I'd bring the pit. She's a little bit more vicious, and she's more meaty. In the
okay.
case
Yeah, there's more to go on there. You get a couple
Exactly.
extras.
All right, one more item.
One more item. Gosh.
And remember, you gotta live out
I
there.
have to
You have to
live out
harvest. You
there.
have to hunt and gather.
A weapon.
A weapon.
Obviously. Yeah, I'd bring a weapon for sure.
What kind?
I hate guns, but I'd probably figure out how to use one.
Okay, so you probably bring like a rifle or
Yep,
something.
absolutely.
Okay, so rifle, music, journal, hot Cheetos, and dog meal.
That's hilarious.
Dog/meal.
I like how the gun was
Dog
like the
slap.
last
Right.
item she hit.
Okay, you have to watch the show.
Okay, now I have
Yeah,
to.
just watch an episode and see what they bring.
Oh,
Because
man.
they're
And
a
by
lot.
the way,
Yeah.
In 5 months, nobody lasted 5 months on the show.
Of course.
No.
I think they were about almost 2.5, 3 months.
Yeah, it was
the
like,
episode
what,
was
70 something days?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so anyway, thank you for that. That was great. I am Laura Cathcart Robbins, and this is the only one in the room. But I am never the only one in this room because, as usual, my boyfriend, producer, and co-host, Scott Slaughter, who I call Hun, is here as well.
Hi, honey.
Hey, honey. So today we are talking to our only 2-year contest winner. We need like they used to have on the radio when they would have bell
The bells
sounds.
and
Yeah.
Ding, 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 ding.
Ding, 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 ding. This is Shanetta McDonald. She is a creative based in Los Angeles. And after spending more than 10 years in PR and sales with executive level roles for national and global brands, Shanetta decided to move her passions for wellness and storytelling to the forefront of her life with Motif, a community focused on supporting the healing, well-being, and connection among women of color by sharing their stories. She is also a badass podcaster, which I wanted to just mention because I just love that about you. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're so glad you won the contest.
Me too.
And there's something on our YouTube channel now you'll see where I was actually going to call Shanetta and ask her to come and tell her story. And then her submission came in. So it was meant to be. I'm really happy that you're here. So I wanted to ask you first, how do you identify?
She, her.
She, her.
Mhm.
Okay. So Motif was inspired by your personal story, right? Which involved battling and recovering from an eating disorder stemming from childhood traumas. is it okay to talk about the nature of some of those traumas?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so interesting. I'm currently doing EMDR with a new therapist that I discovered. And, my childhood trauma, there's a timeline, but most of it happened prior to the age of, I would say, 11, which is your peak coming of age years. I mean, my brain wasn't even fully formed, but some of those examples of what that include is I grew up in a household with addiction. So my mother was on drugs for at least until I was about 4 years old. She did get sober. She's still sober to this day.
Oh, wow.
My father wasn't around, but his struggles were also felt, although he wasn't present. And so, even with underneath those layers of just addiction, there was gun violence, domestic violence. I mean, I was involved in cross gang fire when I was like 8 years old, which, I mentioned I'm afraid of guns. So that is where that comes from.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Chicago.
Right.
Yeah, I grew up in Chicago.
So I was born there. I think
yes,
we talked about
did.
that. Yeah.
So no surprise there. So yeah, I mean, just a number of different traumas at a very, very young age that, of course, I didn't realize impacted my life until I became an adult.
Right, because it was probably like everybody's going through that.
Yeah, of course.
Right?
Yeah.
That was just like a day. That was Tuesday.
Yeah, exactly. And as I got older, one thing that I've learned is that I have forgotten, probably by survival, forgotten a lot of the things that have happened to me or had happened to me as a child that I'm getting the fun opportunity to recall as I work through those traumas because they've showed up in my life.
Can you just say what EMDR is?
Yes. Gosh, I'm going to screw up what it stands for.
Me too. I forgot what it stands. I know what it is.
Yes. But it's basically I think it's pretty clinical, actually, a clinical method of therapy to help those resolve and move past certain traumas that have happened in their life. So one thing that I forgot to mention is that in January of 2020, I was diagnosed with CPTSD, which is basically complex PTSD. And the difference, to my understanding, between that and regular PTSD is complex is a series of traumatic events, and they typically happen at a younger age, versus PTSD is usually centered around one major traumatic event. So for me, obviously, I had a number of different events, and I was vetting a new therapist at the time, and she was like, "What have you been diagnosed with?" And I was like, "What do you mean?"
Yeah, right?
Nothing. I'm fine.
I'm fine.
And she was like, yeah, I think you have complex PTSD. And it was not surprising, but it was just also really, really helpful to just know that, there's nothing per se wrong with me, but there is a name for what I've been experiencing. My hypervigilance, my control issues, my fear of pretty much everything. I just told Laura I have a tattoo on my arm that says fearless, and I was like, it should say fear of everything, because that is how I am. And, those behaviors for me have showed up in all areas of my life, especially relationships with my fiance. And, I started off wanting to get better for the relationship, and have, obviously wanted to just get better for myself and to just feel less anxiety, to feel less afraid. And because, and I know we'll dive into the food and body stuff, but what happened was a lot of those things became more manageable through the help of recovery, and all of the other things, the true CPTSD symptoms that I have surfaced over the past years. So, it's like whack-a-mole. One thing goes down and then
always
another thing comes up.
Yeah, and I don't remember what EMDR stands for either, but I know that there's an eye movement piece where your eyes go back and forth, and that somehow it allows you to get access to things that you wouldn't be able to access before.
Exactly.
Is that right?
And I tried around earlier in quarantine last year, and it wasn't really for me at the time. I was doing it virtually, and the therapist had reception issues, and I was like, this is weird.
That's weird.
Very weird. Yeah. So I have a new person that I'm working with, and I'm actually doing it with bilateral music. I can't tell you how any of it works.
Wow.
It's actually called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing.
Thank you.
Yes. So I think what it is they use the movement of the eyes to sort of kind of distract your thinking, and it opens up stuff. But because I've seen it done, and I was really mesmerized by the whole process.
Yeah. I mean, when I did it, my eyes were covered, and then there was something going back and forth in front of me, and I followed it, and then listened to her voice. I don't know how helpful it was, but I was definitely better after we finished our sessions. So that was part of it.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you, because you talked about food just a minute there. How did food help? When did you discover that food helped?
Food helped. Now that I think about it, as I've grown in my recovery, for all of my life, it helped. I was a child who, and I don't per se think I was necessarily born with this thing, although one therapist I had years ago when I first got help for my eating disorder said that, there are genetics that play into it. And she said, your mother, she did drugs, and you might have not chosen that drug, but she probably chose another one, right?
Yeah.
And for me, mine was food and body. So looking back as a child, food was very soothing, but mostly sugar. So I was a big sugar addict.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's abnormal for a child to get their allowance and go to the candy store, which is what I did. But that habit of having some sort of sugar every day continued well into my young adulthood. And so...
Did you get Jonesy for it?
Yeah, I mean, there was just no day that I didn't have it.
So you didn't have to Jones.
I didn't have to Jones. It was just like I always had candy.
Yeah.
It was always there.
Yeah.
So, it was absolutely just something that was comforting to me. And then the sugar for me kind of translated into, once I hit, I guess, tween in my teenage years, me being obsessed with my body and developing. I was a late developer, so I didn't have much. And then I got everything, and I was just like, whoa, this is too much.
Yeah.
And obviously that back then I didn't know I had obsessive behavior, and it just really latched on to me wanting to fix whatever I thought needed to be fixed, which was obviously, my body. And
sorry, I'm just going to stop you for a second. So you were someone who had not developed early, like some of your peers had, right?
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you were this developed woman. At what age?
15.
15.
Yeah, I would say 15 or 16. I mean, back then girls had stuff at I would say 12 or 13.
Yeah.
So for in my group of friends, I was definitely a little bit of a late developer.
Okay. And then so why did you want to change that when you developed?
When I developed, I think it was, going back, I never wanted it because I did have an older sister who's about 3.5 years older than me. And I saw that she developed early on, and I saw the attention she got from boys and men, and I just did not want any of that. I was the baby of my family. I still am. Yes. And I kind of wanted to maintain that youth,
status.
That status of just like, she's the baby. And so when I did develop, I just didn't want the attention. I kind of wanted to just disappear. But I also got teased for not having, and then I got teased for having it. So, it's just, it really, there's no way you can truly prevent it. And, I think once I did get the unwanted attention from mostly, obviously, boys at that time, I wanted to perfect it. And I started to notice once I gained a little bit too much weight and what that looked like for me. And again, never processed any of this back then, but it was just something in me that was like, you have to get a grip on this. You have to control this.
Yeah. This is all in Chicago?
Mm-hmm.
And was the area where you were, was it predominantly Black?
I grew up in mostly diverse spaces for, I would say, most to not all of my life. So mostly a good mix, actually, in some spaces where being Black was the minority.
Yeah. So tell me about how that looked then, you trying to make it like there was bulimia, right?
Yes.
Was there also compulsive overeating?
Yeah.
Or did that come later?
Yeah, there was definitely a timeline with how everything progressed. So early on, it was sugar. So a lot of sugar. Then
I just really quickly, I have to just mention, and I've said this before, the Food and Drug Administration is food and drug for a reason. Food is a drug.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they regulate the same way. And I don't know why no one ever notices that it's that and doesn't think that food is a drug or the way we treat it. Anyway, so go ahead.
Yeah. I mean, I say I could be easily addicted to anything. Like, yeah. I mean, it depends on the day. I'm like, I want more of that. And I'm like, okay.
Yes.
So yeah, initially early on, it was definitely a lot of sugar. And then I think my interest in controlling my weight took over. So definitely a lot of yo-yo dieting. And I actually moved to Boston in 2009, I believe. And that is where the bulimia started. I was very, very lonely, very just at my wit's end with trying to control my weight also. So once it became harder to control my weight, I sought out an alternative, and that is when the bulimia started.
Right.
And
so before you were just restricting?
Yep, a lot of restricting, yo-yo dieting, and sugar, trying to control the sugar in my body.
Right. And then, so you moved to Boston for school?
For work, actually.
For work,
which
that's
I don't recommend.
Right. Yeah.
As a young adult, someone in their 20s, it's a little bit challenging.
Because that was also, I moved from Chicago to Cambridge.
Oh, wow.
I think we talked about that too. Yeah.
A lot of similarities.
We talked about that too, but yeah. Thank you, honey. So you're there working, and so now you found this other way to control not just your weight, but how you feel. Mm-hmm. So tell me how bulimia made you feel. Like, why was it something that you desired?
It felt easy. It felt like it was easier than, because I still wanted to eat, right? Like, it wasn't like, I didn't have the craving to eat, or I wasn't strong enough to be an anorexic or whatever, but I still wanted to eat. So bulimia gave me the opportunity to eat my food, but to also get rid of it. Right. And it also gave me the out of feeling any discomfort. Because, and we'll talk about where I am today, but, I am not perfect. Like, I may have an extra bite of a meal, but now I know the feeling of discomfort passes and I can sit through that, right?
Wait, what do you mean discomfort?
Discomfort of feeling too full, right? Okay. Feeling too full, having an extra bite, and I mean, I think most people, especially most normies, are able to be like, oh my gosh, I ate too much, I'm too full. But, for someone like me, it's really triggering, right? Because that thought and that feeling of feeling too full is going to transpire into me thinking I'm going to immediately gain weight, right. And just not wanting to sit with it. It's, I guess, a metaphor for not wanting to sit with my feelings. Yeah. Essentially is what it is. And so it felt easy and it felt quick, and I still got my fix, right? Because above all, I am a compulsive person. I'm a compulsive overeater. So I wanted the food first and foremost. I didn't want the effects of eating copious amounts of food.
Yeah. And then, so tell me, like, what was your low weight and your high weight during that time period?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is my weight has always been around the same 10 pounds. So to the outside world, I look the same. Yeah. No one would ever know. I mean, I've definitely gotten older over the years, but I would say, a 10-pound variation, So it wasn't drastic at all.
Right. But in your head, those 5 pounds that might come on after a few times of discomfort, where that was like, you couldn't have that.
Yeah, couldn't have it.
So then talk to me. I want to kind of shift now into being Black. I mean, you were always Black, but
that never changed.
That never changed. But how is it, or how was it for you, or how is it for you being a Black woman with an eating disorder? Because I know that you talked about struggling in silence. So can you tell me about that?
Yeah. It was, I think, in my disease, first of all, I didn't know what everyone else was doing. I knew what I was doing only. But I always just knew that what I was doing was unique to me as a Black woman. I just kind of knew that. And, struggling in silence, I think most people struggle in silence with any ism that they're trying to overcome. But the added layer of struggling in silence with something that you don't hear anyone around you talk about is really interesting.
Yeah.
For me, had it been drugs or alcohol, that would have been familiar just because of the nature of, Black and brown households and my family. My parents were a product of, raising me in the 80s. So that was very familiar for me. But eating disorders, not so much at all. And even so, I've been in recovery for 8 years, maybe a little bit more, obviously more years ago than that. Even white women weren't talking about it. Like, it wasn't just a thing that people were publicly open with talking about if you think about celebrity culture and pop culture. So for me, it was easy to hide it because I didn't find that there were any safe spaces that I could share what I was doing with my body. And yeah, it just really, really kind of shaped that whole experience for me of just really sitting in silence with it. And also because Black women are seen as just being so proud of our bodies all the time. And so for me to not be proud of what I thought I looked like, because that was skewed as well, was surprising to everyone around me. So when I was on one of my mini diets, the people around me were like, "You look great, you look fine." And I'm like, "No, I don't. You don't understand.
You don't understand.
You don't understand."
Well, and I know, for me, I was, I'm just short of 5'9", and I was 96 pounds until I was in my mid-20s. I was really skinny. And I so envied anybody who could gain weight, because in my community, which was also really diverse, but the brothers were not checking for a sister that was 96 pounds. Like, that was something was wrong with me. And it was like, every time I opened my mouth to talk about it, everybody's like, "Oh my God, you can't gain weight." Poor you. But it made me ashamed. And it was a different struggle, but there was no one I could check in with about it or talk to about it. So anyway, it was, I understand. And then from my own recovery from drugs and alcohol, I understand struggling in silence. Tell me, I know that you saw a post written by a Black woman at some point. Did that coincide with your bottom?
Yes, that was my bottom. I remember sitting at work. I was working in Westwood at the time, and at that point, I knew something was wrong. I actually Googled help with eating disorders, and not much came up. I think I call it a restrictive program called How, it actually came up.
Oh yeah.
And it was like, eat vegetables and protein, and I was just like, no, it's not gonna work for me.
That's not what we're talking about.
Not at all. So it felt really restrictive, but because I knew of 12-step from my mother, right? So I was raised going to NA meetings with her, so it was very familiar to me. But when I Googled it, nothing came up. And I was at a point in my eating disorder where I felt like I would black out with food. So say, for example, someone would bring lunch to work and it would be a free-for-all, and I would just already have my lunch. So I've eaten lunch already, and then I would see food on the table and be like, "I'm not going to eat that. I'm not going to eat that." And then minutes later I had eaten it, and I'm like, what just happened? Like, I said I wasn't going to eat that, and I'm so full. And it literally felt like I blacked out. And so that had happened multiple times, and I was at work. I don't know how I came across this article on some random blog site, but it was a Black girl talking about her eating disorder and how it led to her developing esophageal cancer.
Oh, snap.
Yeah, so she actually developed cancer, and it scared the shit out of me. It scared me. And I think if it wasn't that day, it may have been very soon after. I found some random general doctor I had never been to in Westwood, because I forgot to mention I had started to develop issues with just swallowing food, obviously from the bulimia. And I ignored it, of course. And I was like, I have to go to the doctor. I probably have cancer. And of course, my mind started to spin. And I went to this doctor, had great reviews on Yelp. And I remember sitting in his office, and he was like, "Hey, I'm Dr. So-and-so. It's nice to meet you. I hear you're here for acid reflux. Why? You're pretty young and healthy. Why do you think you have acid reflux?" And I was like, because I think I'm bulimic. And it was the first time I'd ever said the words out loud to anyone. And of course I started sobbing in his office. Yes. So he gets me some tissue and he's like, okay, well, I can help you with the acid reflux, but, but I do recommend you go talk to someone else. And I mean, that article, reading it scared me into action is what it was. And you know, I think my bottom had been approaching, and I've hit other bottoms in program, or in my recovery at least. I didn't give up sugar right away. It took me a couple of years to put that down. Because
you don't eat sugar at all now?
So I don't eat sugar. I don't eat recreational sugar. So desserts, cookies, cakes, pastries. But I can have things with sugar in them that don't trigger me. You know, it's really challenging because we need food to live. So
yeah.
It's you know, been a matter of me figuring out what works for me, what doesn't work for me, and just having the willingness to listen to that.
Yeah. So where did you go though when he said you should go talk to someone?
Yeah, I went to a therapist. I went to some random therapist who I credit with also helping me to get help. She started to fall asleep during our sessions, so I didn't work with her much longer after.
Yeah, no, I would say
wasn't a long-term relationship.
That's a red flag.
Exactly. I was like, I think she's asleep.
Yeah.
But yeah, so she recommended 12-step. She was like, okay, well, here's the thing. We can talk about whatever you want to talk about, but there's this program people go to, very unsexy name, excuse me. And she's like, you can go to this program, check out a couple of meetings if you like. If not, no worries. And I took her advice and I went to one of those meetings, and I have been in those meetings ever since. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
What's it like in that particular 12-step program for a woman of color, for a Black woman in particular?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first meeting I went to, they call it the Kitchen Sink. It's in West LA, and it was mostly older white people. And at the time, I think I was maybe 26. So I was definitely young, and I mean, I definitely knew I was definitely the only Black person, and probably one of the very few younger people in that meeting. And I was so willing. I didn't care. Like, I knew I was like, this feels weird and out of place, but I didn't care. The person who I asked to be my sponsor, she was the newcomer contact. And I was just like, hey, I'm new at the end of the meeting. And she was like, okay, you want to give me your number? And, you know, it's definitely gotten more diverse as the years have gone on. I've been in recovery for 8 years. So the rooms have definitely diverse, especially with everything being on Zoom, which is really nice. Getting to see people from all over the country.
Yes, and the world.
Yeah, literally.
Yeah.
So yeah, my I guess hesitation was really not there. I was just so willing, to do the work. And it is still rare to see a lot of Black women in particular. There are people of color, but to see Black women, and I have my thoughts as to why that is as a whole. But I'm always excited to see somebody Black in program.
Right.
Like, hey, girl.
Hey, girl. So you have created Motif, which is a space for people to connect and heal. And you talk about your eating disorder within Motif.
Yes.
How has that been? How have people come and found you? Have you done for anybody what that woman did for you?
You know, I would hope so. I'm not sure, though. What's funny is before Motif, I wrote a story for Refinery 29 in 2018, if I'm not mistaken, about my eating disorder. Yeah. And I got so much outreach from Black girls on social media who were like, oh my gosh, I struggle with this too. So that was kind of like the first foray into me realizing the power of just sharing what's going on with me. Yeah. And it led to Motif. I mean, you know, my intention with Motif was generated from the connection that I've had with other people and talking about my struggles and knowing how powerful it is to identify with someone else's story. Yes. Obviously, same thing with, you know, you're doing with this podcast, right?
Yes.
So it really bred the idea for that. And I talk about it all the time. I have no shame or no qualms with saying, I have an eating disorder, and I am working through it.
It's so beautiful. Thank you for doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you for being that voice, because it's we all need light to move toward, right? And for me, there was an absence of that at first in my rooms of recovery, and then they started appearing, you know, and some of them didn't look like me. They just had stories like mine. But unless you share those stories, but I think it's really important for people that look like us to share our stories so that other people can feel safe to come in and say me too. What's next for you, Shanetta?
What is next? Continuing to create and build the community of Motif. It is my baby.
Yes.
We just wrapped up season 1 of the Motif podcast last week. Mostly so I can get a break because I'm tired.
Right? We're on a break right now.
Oh, gosh. And it's interesting, because the break consists of me probably doing more work to get ready for this.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, it's kind of a break, but not really.
Right.
So really focusing on that and, continuing to heal.
Yes. Yeah. Where can people find you?
Gosh, a lot of places. So for Motif, the website is a great place to start, ourmotif.co. And then I'm on Instagram at _IAMSHAN.
Great. And then your address so people can come find you at home. No, I'm just kidding.
I'm like, social, that's great too.
Right. This is so good seeing you. It's so good seeing you. So good hearing your story. I so appreciate you coming over to our home, which is where Scott has built our post-COVID studio, and which allows us to interview people like you in person. I'm so grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Shanetta.
Thank you so much for having me.